in the last few months, focus, of course, all of us struggling with the pandemic and unemployment in California just skyrocketing like it did across the country. But many constituents were having difficulty getting through to EDD, being able to get unemployment benefits, start rolling out to them. They're in dire situation because they've been laid off or lost their job completely and have no prospects of getting back to that particular position. So the legislature was really grappling with how do we get the auditor in there. So what they ultimately decided to do was approve what they called an emergency audit. So the legislature, the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, which is a bicameral committee, 7 senators, 7 assembly members, can, under its rules, the chairman and the vice chairman can approve an audit just as an emergency and direct us to start it immediately. There doesn't need to be a hearing. Other members of JLAC are notified that this emergency audit's been approved by the chair and the vice chair, and unless other members, oppose us moving forward, we're basically mandated to get that work started. So what we did is, and that happened in September of last year, and so we immediately tried to get into EDD, and the administration was very cooperative. A lot of times state departments are reluctant to have us come in, but they were very supportive of us coming in. So we actually conducted 2 audits. I combined some audit teams because I felt like we needed to look at not only what the legislature wanted us to do, which was looking at are my constituents able to get through to EDD? If they're not, what's the problem? What do we need to do to try to fix things? But we also, as an office, have some authority to conduct high-risk audits on our own. And we had looked at federal money coming into California. I'm sure you're aware California received billions upon billions of dollars for a variety of different purposes. And certainly some of those funds were for EDD and the administration of unemployment benefits in California. So I combined those efforts. I said, we'll do the legislature's emergency work, but let's do some other additional work to see if there are other things we can identify as problems and hopefully come up with some solutions that are going to help people in our state. So I'm going to talk very high level about a couple of audits we issued. We started these audits in mid to late September, got them done by the end of January. And I told staff, I know we lose time because of holidays and all that, but we have to get these things done early in the year so that the legislature and hopefully the administration can make some improvements in our EDD system. Clearly, we have an antiquated IT system, which you can't really do a lot about, but there are certainly things that we identified that they can do now, and they actually implemented some things during the course of the audits we were working on. So the first audit was looking at people being able to apply for and get unemployment compensation, unemployment benefits. And of course, we found a lot of problems. People were having difficulty getting through to the call center, to have an agent assist them in filling out the forms online to be able to just get a claim submitted and accepted, and then hopefully get benefits start flowing to them. One of the things that we were very concerned and disappointed to see is some of the issues we identified in the report that we issued in January, we had identified back in 2011 when we had audited EDD. And why were we auditing EDD back in 2011? The recession. And unemployment had spiked back in those days, and the legislature were members in those days were receiving complaints. I can't get through the call center. I need my benefits. I've been unemployed for a certain amount of time now. Help me. And so we had audited the call centers. We had identified issues with the call centers back in 2011 and made some recommendations. We had identified issues with their process for reviewing a claim and determining whether or not this person is eligible for benefits. So it was disappointing to see that some of the things that we had suggested, particularly EDD coming up with a recession plan. It sounds weird to be planning for a recession, but as we all know, recessions are cyclical, And so every 5 to 6 years, California is in the country ultimately is heading into a recession. So we need to be prepared as a state when we end up having that spike in unemployment claims. And we made recommendations to EDD in the past in 2011. Have a recession plan. And then when you have spikes in unemployment, you have the ability to pull staff from other units to assist in the call center, to assist in processing claims, so that you don't end up with the tremendous backlogs that we're seeing. And of course, when we conducted this audit, we found huge backlogs. Some of those backlogs were related to people, whether or not they had been deemed eligible for unemployment, or whether they had been able to continue to get their payments every few weeks. So key issues: really struggled with processing claims, people not able to get through to the call center. I mean, clearly the number of calls spiked. We saw back in 2011, they were 15–16% of people were able to get through to an actual human being to talk. When the pandemic hit and more people are unemployed and more calls are coming in, that dropped down to less than 1%. So essentially, nobody's getting through to the call center. If you get through the call center, you're talking to an agent, because I'm sure you're aware, the administration, Newsom administration, said we're going to hire thousands of people to help with the call center, which they did. But unfortunately, those people that were assigned to the call center didn't have the knowledge of how the process works. So if I was able to get through to an agent, that agent couldn't help me because they didn't have sufficient training. They didn't have enough experience to be able to answer all my questions. So I had to take down the information and say, someone will get back to you, which of course, as it for an unemployed individual, oh, I got through and now this person can't even help me. So it's very frustrating for members of legislature, because their constituents were not able to get help from our employment development department. So that was a huge issue. The other thing that EDD decided to do, and this ties into our second report, the second report we issued was related to fraud. And of course, everyone has heard there's billions of dollars in fraud in California. Unfortunately, we were able to confirm that it's at least between 10 and 11 billion. EDD is now suggesting it's upwards of $19 billion. Well, we had to look in and see why are these fraudulent payments going out? And one of the things we found is that the administration, when they were trying to balance, and they were under a lot of pressure, we've got to get these payments out to individuals. We've got to balance that with trying to prevent fraud. Well, what they decided to do, and it was an unfortunate decision, is to shut down some of the controls that they had in their IT system to prevent fraud. So one of the key controls is I submit my information, EDD has to verify my identity. Is it really Elaine Howle? So I need driver's license information, I need address, I need employment information. The other eligibility determination is, did I earn enough wages over the course of the last year or the last several quarters to be eligible for unemployment benefits? They basically waived that requirement. So if you applied and you submitted your application, it was complete, you were going to get benefits, whether you were eligible or not. So there were a lot of individuals who received benefits that were not necessarily entitled to those benefits. They stopped doing that. They put the control back in place when the U.S. Department of Labor became aware that they had basically lifted that control and was just paying anybody that applied. So that was one of the contributors to fraudulent payments going out. Another contributing factor was they weren't, and you've heard about this, they weren't cross-matching. So incarcerated individuals, either at the local level or at state facilities, Department of Corrections facilities, were submitting claims for unemployment and receiving benefits because EDD was not cross-matching, which they had been doing in the past, and they decided not to continue to do it, where they would cross-match an individual who submitted a claim with data they received from local county jails, jails at the local level. They had never matched against state incarcerated individuals or individuals located out of state, because we actually have some circumstances where it's an individual who's in a facility in another state who submitted an unemployment claim for California and ultimately got payments. So that cross-matching wasn't happening. We talked to them during the course of the audit. They actually were able to get a contract in place relatively quickly, got a contract up and running in October, started that cross-matching, and immediately identified $810 million in benefits that were associated with individuals who were incarcerated either in the state facility or at a local county facility. In some cases, the inmate's identity was stolen, but in the vast majority of cases, these are individuals in prison who are submitting unemployment claims. And because that cross-matching wasn't happening, those benefits went out. They now have that control in place. So there were things that the administration did to try to get benefits out very quickly that clearly opened up the opportunity for individuals to commit fraud. The other issue that we identified, and again, the U.S. Department of Labor jumped on California on this because they were very upset about it, was that whenever someone submits an unemployment claim, they have to, again, be deemed eligible. They lifted that requirement. And then the next requirement is I have to continue to submit every couple of weeks continued eligibility forms saying I'm looking for work, I'm trying to get a job, I am available to work, and I'm able to work. But again, EDD and the labor agency secretary said, let's not ask for those continued claims anymore. Let's just keep paying people. The problem with that is there are some people, as the economy opened up again a little bit, people were able to go back to work and they were receiving pay from working. Well, during that time frame, they're not eligible for unemployment. But many of those people chose not to notify EDD, and EDD, if they were notified, because we saw some examples where people are trying to, in good faith, say, hey, I'm working again, halt my benefits. EDD didn't even look at that information. They just set it aside and said, let's just keep paying people. So we identified it's close to $1 million. I mean, it ultimately will end up being more because it's tens upon thousands of claims where they ultimately, when USDOL said, you can't do that, you need to put that control back in place, then they started doing the cross matching. So Elaine's collecting unemployment benefits, but I, EDD, am getting reports from her employer saying she's getting paid. So she's double dipping. And they have those cross matches, and there's over close to 800,000 of those matches, if I'm getting the numbers right, where EDD is going to now have to go back and determine, Elaine, you weren't eligible for benefits during that time frame because you went back to work, so you owe us money. You got to pay us back, the state of California. So there are a variety of things that EDD did, and they were trying to make what they thought was the best decision. Unfortunately, they didn't consider all of the implications of lifting those controls. What are the risks? You've got to identify what the risks are and see if there are ways to mitigate those risks so that we reduce the amount of fraud in the program. So those were some significant problems that we had. Of course, everyone has heard about multiple forms going out to an address where somebody's getting 30 EDD envelopes in their mailbox, and none of them are addressed to anybody at that house. And we had done an audit a couple of years ago about that, where EDD was sending out forms with people's full Social Security number and certainly high risk of identity theft. And we made recommendations. It was a report we issued in 2019 saying you have to truncate that. You've got to either use a unique identifier or you've got to truncate that social so someone can't steal this person's identity. And we identified just a couple of forms. If you fix these two forms, you're going to prevent millions of claims of these types of forms from going out. Well, EDD didn't do that. They made some changes, but it was to forms that have much lower volume, and it just didn't work. So we did a follow-up. In addition to the work we were doing for the legislature under the emergency audit, and then this high-risk work, I said, let's do a follow-up on this other audit because of all the issues Mr. Patterson and other members of the legislature were saying, why are my constituents getting all of these multiple, envelopes in their mailbox? What is going on? So we went back into EDD to follow up on that previous audit we had issued in 2019 and said, why haven't you fixed this problem? We told you how to do it. It's relatively easy to do. You can't blame it on the IT system. You need to fix this, and you need to fix it now. So we made those recommendations in November of 2020. We also made recommendations for all three of these reports to the legislature. We said, you have got to get a state law on the books that prohibits EDD from sending out materials with people's full Social Security numbers, which there are at least 3 or 4 bills making their way through the process right now. We have other bills related to EDD streamlining their process, doing a better job with their call center. They weren't using all the functionality of their call center. Their call center allows people to the technology that they have allows people to, basically say, I need help with X. And then the call center system tracks that information, and then EDD would be able to know, well, most people are calling about their eligibility, or what time frame am I supposed to report my wages, or some other type of question, where then we said, then you can have a frequently asked questions section on your website, so people don't even have to call. That's going to cut down on the call volume. It's going to help the individual who's unemployed get the information they need to be able to get their claim submitted and start receiving benefits. So there are a lot of best practices out there. There's a lot of capabilities that EDD had that they were not availing themselves of. So we made recommendations related to that as well. So fast forward right now, we've had multiple hearings with the legislature. There are at least, we track bills because the legislature works with us. We always offer our services as far as if they're going to introduce legislation, we look at the language of the bill and let them know, yes, this will fix the problem that we identified. Right now, we know there's at least 8 bills in both houses making their way through related to protecting people's identity, making sure their call center is appropriate, making sure they're putting together a recession plan so they understand, we're going to come out of this pandemic. The economy is going to recover, please, hopefully soon. But ultimately, in the future, we're going to run into a recession again, and we need to be prepared. So there's legislation making its way through right now to require EDD to put a recession plan together. What do we do when unemployment spikes? Do we have staff we can pull from other units? How do we handle the call center? What are the types of things like an emergency plan we need to put in place to be able to address the situation where unemployment increases significantly? So those are some of the things we did with respect to EDD. Mark, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, would you like to take some questions as you're going through each of these reports, or at the end? What would be best?
No, I was just going to say we could maybe it's best we go to Q&A now, because I was going to start talking about the affordable housing audit, but let's talk about EDD.
Let's see if I can get some of these for you. Were there any consequences to the staff at EDD for not implementing some of your suggestions? Another similar question had to do with about upper management. They've been ignoring these deficiencies. Do we need a better upper management?
Well, we have a new director at EDD. I said, the director in the past, she retired in December. I think it was not because of our audit, but I think a lot of the pressure from the legislature. And I think the administration wasn't happy with some of the responses that EDD was giving them as far as how we were handling as a state unemployment in California. Clearly it's tone at the top, and I have had multiple meetings with the new director. And in fact, she has asked, we have to be careful because we've got to maintain our independence. But she has asked, as we start implementing your recommendations, Elaine, can my staff talk to your staff and make sure that what we're doing is going to work? There is essentially moving us in the right direction as a department. And absolutely, we've done that with other agencies. Now, we can't make decisions for you, but if you come up with how you think you're going to handle the call center, we can say, yeah, that's going to get you there, or no, that's not even close to being enough. So we are working with the new administration. We have a new agency secretary because Julie Sue is now in the Biden administration. I haven't met with the new agency secretary, but certainly have met with the director of EDD and also with some other high-level staff. And they Newsom brought in a bunch of new people shortly before our audit was completed in January. So we're dealing with new administrators over at EDD. Now, the one thing, in fairness to the administration, nobody expected a pandemic. Unemployment is crazy high and it's getting better. A lot of other states have dealt with unemployment fraud in their unemployment system. Part of it is because one of the programs, it's called the PUA program, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, for like gig workers, for individuals, you have no way of verifying their income because they don't really they're self-employed essentially. You have very little chance of verifying their income as opposed to employers who are reporting to EDD. Problem is, as I said, EDD just waived that requirement and didn't even check. So I think the fact that they're putting some of those controls back in place, They have new management who are really paying particular attention, and the legislature's all over it. It's not like it's, hey, that happened back in January. They are still on top of a lot of these issues. They've been reaching out to us related to the bills that they've introduced to make sure that the language is going to work, that the timeframes they put in the bills make sense, that sort of thing. So we're hoping things will improve. I mean, the biggest issue, and it's not just unique to California, is our IT system is so antiquated. It's very difficult to make those kinds of changes very quickly.
Actually, Elaine, there's actually someone who actually asked that specific question, saying, the upgrades in IT and computer software are long overdue, or any plans for improvement. This seems to be, and I've done reports on the various state agencies. This is not just a problem at one agency. This is a common problem in state government.
Absolutely a common problem in state government, especially for huge agencies like EDD, Department of Social Services, Department of Healthcare Services that deals with Medi-Cal. They really struggle with their IT systems because they're so big and they're so old.
Another person asked a question about the clawing back that $19 billion. When you think about that $19 billion, that's real money. Now we're talking real money, right? How much of that money is the state going to be able to claw back?
Probably not very much, because a lot of it is what we talk about in the audit report is imposter fraud, where somebody stole someone's identity. Mm-hmm. And we had an example in the report. So in 2019, EDD fielded about 6,000 complaints from folks saying, I think my identity's been stolen. In the first 9 or 10 months of the pandemic, so I think it was from March until November or December, they had close to 80,000 complaints of people thinking that their identity had stolen. They, and more recently, people are getting 1099s. Oh, here's the amount of unemployment benefits you received, Elaine. Well, I never even filed. So clearly my identity's been stolen. So EDD has a huge backlog of those claims, and that workload is in addition over and above what they're dealing with on a daily basis.
Wow. Lots of issues there. You've done some other reports too. What about that report on affordable housing?
Yeah, affordable housing, that's an interesting one. We've done a couple of audits on homelessness in California. We all know that's a huge issue, but members of the legislature wanted us to look at affordable housing, multifamily housing. What is California doing to build more affordable housing and have that accessible to individuals? Because as we know, I'm sure, housing in California is extremely expensive, and it's not just to purchase a home, but to rent a.
Can I just jump in here for a second, because I want to cite your report back to you, because you've got some great numbers here. They can really illuminate the scope of the problem. You said for California just to stay current, they're going to have to produce 180,000 units a year to keep up with housing demand. Of those, 70,000 need to be affordable housing. Yet we're only averaging 19,000 affordable housing units. We need 70,000. We're producing 19,000. Just to give you an idea of the scope of the problem, which, by the way, obviously gets worse every year.
Absolutely, Mark. And the other issue that we identified in the report is what we called burden, housing burden for folks. So, 40% of the people in California are considered low income individuals. So they make less than 80% of the median income in whatever region they live in. But we also identified, and HUD has put out some information related to this too. It's about 1.6 million people in California are burdened by the cost of housing. So they're using more than 30% of their household income to pay for rent or their mortgage. It's huge. And then there's another smaller subset group that pays more than 50% of their income is paying for housing, either rent or, again, a mortgage if they're fortunate enough to own a home. But as Mark indicated, California needs to build thousands upon thousands of units, and not just single family homes, but multifamily homes. So the legislature wanted to know, what are we doing as a state? What are our state agencies that are responsible for making sure that they're working with local communities and developers to try to get this housing built? And so there's several different state agencies. There's Housing Community Development. There are a couple of committees under the State Treasurer's Office that deals with tax credits and debt limits to assist builders in getting the resources to be able to build this type of housing. And then there's CalHFA, which is another agency that assists with funding and resources. One of the key things we found that's highly problematic is our Housing Community Development Agency or department is supposed to put together an annual plan related to housing in California. Where's the need? Okay, what resources do we have available to meet that need? How do we partner with local communities and certainly with developers to get this type of housing built so that people can afford either to rent a place or to purchase a home? And so the annual plan wasn't identifying the resources, wasn't specifically identifying the need. Where is the need regionally? Another huge issue that we identified in the report, and we've made some recommendations to the legislature, and there's a lot of bills related to affordable housing. I was counting this morning because we track legislation tied to our audits, and it's at least 15 to 17 bills currently making their way through the process. But what we were saying is we looked at, okay, if I'm a developer and I need to go to the state treasurer's office and try to get some resources, and then I need to report information to HCD, and then I need to work with CalHFA. The requirements for the same project I want to build with HCD are different than the ones I have to provide to state treasurer's office, and then I've got to go through another process it's ridiculous. So we said, you've got to streamline these requirements so that it's like a one-stop shop. If I'm meeting the requirements that the state treasurer's office needs for tax credits, then I'm meeting the requirements that HCD is looking for me to get approval. The other issue we identified in the report is some of the local control. There are some localities in California that don't want to build multifamily housing, and they make it difficult for developers and others. They either have high fees, a process that takes a long time to get approval of a particular project, or they have certain density issues. So some localities we looked at allowed for higher density, 50 units on a particular size parcel, as opposed to another locality would say, no, you can only build 20 on that or 30 on that. So we made some recommendations to the legislature. You've got to allow for and perhaps require higher density, particularly multifamily housing.
Hey, can I just jump here for a second, Elaine?
Sure.
I'm going to be a data nerd. I love reading your reports because there's so much. I really encourage people to read these reports. There's so much in there. Let me give you a little background on some of the numbers that you guys came up with. You found that 97% of local jurisdictions, in 90% of local jurisdictions, at least 20% of low-income renter households spend more than half of their income on housing.
Yeah,
97%. So that's to be specific, 523 out of 539 local jurisdictions. You mentioned here that only 11% of the needed housing permits were for affordable housing. 81% were for units needed for households with the highest income category. So the focus on housing is on the wealthy, but the need is on folks obviously that need it, lower income. The only thing you said in your report was that at least 470 of the state, which is 87%, of the state's local jurisdictions were not on track to provide, 87% were not on track to provide needed affordable homes. Right. It's just, the numbers are pretty, when you look at those numbers, they're eye-popping.
Yeah, and it's not getting any better. I mean, like we said in the report, and we were trying to lay out that information for the legislature. I mean, we know housing in California is very expensive. It's very expensive to build multifamily housing or single homes, but you're absolutely right. We looked at different jurisdictions, and the permits that were being approved were more for high-end homes versus low-income housing and certainly multifamily.
Can you comment on the local jurisdictions, those annual reports they're supposed to submit on housing?
Well, you're catching me off guard a little bit. So I know the local jurisdictions are supposed to submit information to HCD, because HCD, again, when they put that state plan together, identifies where the needs, they're supposed to be identifying where the needs in California, and each local jurisdiction is assigned a certain amount of housing they need to build that's affordable. And then those localities are supposed to report up to HCD. Well, they report that information. A lot of them aren't reporting on time. But even when they do report it, HCD is not doing anything with the information.
I'm cheating, Elaine. I have notes.
Go ahead.
So using the notes I did for our report, but what you stated in your report was that the state has default standards of what constitutes allowable density. They're saying what the standards are just too low.
Yeah.
So,
right. That's what I was referring to. I think the state standard is between 10 and 30. And we saw some jurisdictions.
You're absolutely correct, by the way. I just looked at it.
Some jurisdictions were allowing for up to 50 because, the state requirement is the floor, 10 to 30. Jurisdictions that were willing to have higher density were able to build more multifamily housing and provide affordable housing to people in their communities as opposed to others. We have some comparisons. The other thing we have on our website, if you or any of you are interested, is we have an IT team here in the state auditor's office. And what we do now is we do a lot of interactive graphics to allow members of the legislature and certainly members of the public to see. So a member of the legislature could go in and say, I want to look at my district, how much affordable housing is needed and how much is being constructed. And how many resources do we have in my jurisdiction, for my constituents? Are we doing well? Or are we not doing well? And what are the neighboring communities looking like? So a lot of the interactive graphics on our website, and you just go to our website and find the audit report, and you'll see a link for the interactive graphics, have been very popular with members. We don't hear a lot from the public, but certainly members and their staff find that information really, really helpful because then they can compare. Well, this locality has a lot of affordable housing. Well, that's because their density standards are 50 and people are fine. Why is this jurisdiction saying, oh, we only want 10 units built on a particular parcel? And some of that is, as the members have suggested, some localities, we don't want to build affordable housing. We don't want that in our community. We don't want multifamily housing. Well, there's a need in your jurisdiction. And because we tie, I'm pretty sure in our interactive graphics, we show, the income levels for individuals in the community. And if there are folks who are, suffering from that high burden of using half or, at least 30% of their household income to pay for housing.
Do you want to also talk about the ARB report?
I wasn't prepared to, but I will.
A little bit about
that. I can. And this is interesting because, it's the Air Resources Board. Of course, we all have heard about cap and trade and the millions upon millions of dollars that are generated. And it's been years. There have been multiple attempts by the legislature to get an audit approved. And this last year, Senator Bradford came to the committee and said, we've never looked at ARB. We need to get the auditor in there to look. And what they asked us to look at is, are we investing as a state our funds that are generated by cap and trade or appropriated by the legislature into the appropriate programs to maximize the value we're getting? So of course, we know about zero emission vehicles. So that program is popular. There's a program called Cars for All. And what that is that's a financing program for low-income individuals to be able to either get grants or low-income loans or certainly rebates if they're able to assist them in purchasing a zero-emission vehicle. The bottom line in the report is what we found is we brought a consultant in. Consultant said, hey, they have good methodologies. They're relatively strong, but they aren't necessarily measuring the distinction between a regulation requiring something versus an incentive program. So for example, a regulation requires auto manufacturers, you have to build X number of zero emission vehicles and make them available to the public. The incentive program is the state providing rebates to individuals who purchase. So it's for the consumer. The regulation applies to the manufacturer. The incentive program applies to the consumer. What CARB wasn't doing is determining, are those incentive programs that we're investing in really generating, driving people, bad word, but, getting people to purchase zero emission vehicles? Is that incentive program really working? And probably with zero emission vehicles it is, but there are other incentive programs that may not necessarily be the best use of our funds. So CARB is not distinguishing between the GHG reductions based on zero emission vehicles on the road, and X amount is for the regulatory part of the program versus the incentive part of the program. So we were suggesting to CARB, you've got to be able to separate those to the extent you can so that we can, inform the legislature. You as an agency can inform the legislature. This program is going gangbusters. It's really working. It's very helpful, or it's not. It's not working as well as we would like. So we want to invest those funds in something else. And the key issue with all of this is, GHGs in California have gone down. I mean, we have a very ambitious goal to try to achieve by 2030, but the transportation sector, passenger vehicles, light duty trucks, heavy duty trucks, fleet like buses, actually has increased. We found that it's increased in the last decade, and 40% of GHG emissions in California are due to these vehicles. So the legislature asked us to focus on the transportation sector because it contributes so much to GHG. And it doesn't seem to be improving all that much. Now, the pandemic, clearly people aren't commuting as much, but the economy is starting to open up again. People are going to start traveling. We've really got to make sure that as a state, we're investing those dollars in the correct programs. So those are some of the key issues. I don't know, Mark, if there's others that I haven't looked at that report in about a week. So
no, that's a great summary. I was going to ask you again. This is just off the cuff, so whatever you can tell us about you guys are in charge of the state redistricting commission. You were involved with that. Can you tell us a little bit about where that process is? Are you involved? The census has been delayed because of the pandemic, and that's affected redistricting. Are you involved in that at all?
We're not involved anymore, but what we do every 10 years is there's a new independent, obviously there's a census every 10 years, and the redistricting of the state, it's state, Senate and Assembly and congressional lines and Board of Equalization. It's all of the districts in California. What my office is required to do when that initiative was on the ballot and approved by the voters, we want an independent commission rather than the legislature drawing the lines or judges, because judges do it in other states. So they require my office every 10 years to establish a new commission of independent individuals to form a 14-member commission that will draw the district lines for all those, Assembly, Senate, Congress, and Board of Equalization. So we had to embark we started in late 2018, but mostly in 2019, where we had to put a program together to solicit interest and get people to, first of all, understand what redistricting is all about, number one, and then number two, try to encourage them to apply to be a member of the Citizens Redistricting Commission. We had to have that commission formed by, I think it was August of last year. That commission has until, typically they have until August of this year, but I think they got an extension because the census is coming out late. But that 14-member commission has been formed. So our job was to get that commission formed and then provide support to the commission until it was up and running.
I think you're being a little modest about just had to get it up and running. Oh my gosh, it sounds like a gargantuan task. Oh, by the way, on top of all the other work you're doing, I hope the state provided you additional staff to get that done. It's a huge task.
No, they didn't provide additional staff. I mean, we used some in-house staff. We hired some consultants to assist us, but this was our second time around. So we had a little bit of institutional knowledge, but it's a huge responsibility, but our staff take it really seriously because as we explained to the staff who ultimately were assigned to this project, you're part of California history. And the decisions that this commission makes when they draw the district lines will have implications for 10 years. And that's a lot of elections in the Assembly every 2 years, Senate every 4 years.
Which is a lot of policy.
Exactly. A lot of policy, a lot of impact for our state. So it's a huge responsibility. Quite honestly, it's a funny thing because when the initiative hit the ballot back in 2008, my chief counsel came to me and said, oh, we're in this redistricting initiative. And I said, oh, we're going to audit the process. And she said, no, we have to develop the process, which isn't something we would have expected to do. But my understanding is they were holding a lot of focus groups, Common Cause and League of Women Voters, and a bunch of different entities that really wanted an independent commission. Had focus groups and asked people, would you prefer to have the legislature do it? Would you prefer to have judges do it? And they threw auditors in there and a couple of other professions, and everybody picked auditors. So That's
No,
how
it's interesting, in the academic world, in research and organizational justice theory, they talk about what's more important, the process or the result. And
Mhm.
research consistently shows that for people to accept decisions, it's the process that's more important than the result. So the
Yeah.
fact that the state auditor is doing it and that that's who the public wants to do it because of your credibility, that enhances the acceptability of the outcome. So
I
a lot
think
extra, a lot of extra work.
yeah, yeah,
They send more work to the people that do a good job, right? So that's your reward. You get more work.
I have great staff.
By the way, there is someone who's asking here about, are you also responsible for the state census effort? You're not responsible for the state census.
No, we
You're
don't
not asking to be responsible.
have
You
nothing
got
to
on
do.
your plate.
No. Mm-mm.
Let me ask you this. You guys do an awful lot of work. Can you point to any policy changes that have resulted as a result of your audits, that were an agency or the legislature has done something in response that's been pretty?
Oh, we measure that all the time. That's like I was saying, tracking the bills. As I said, the quick count I did this morning, there's 17 bills making their way, and it's in both houses, both parties, related to affordable housing. Some of the recommendations we had in that report, the EDD reports, there's at least 8 or 9 bills, again, both houses. I'm pretty sure both parties, and Mr. Patterson has been all over this issue. So we track that, and a lot of the legislation that's introduced ultimately makes it to the governor's desk, and sometimes our reports make the difference. There was an audit we did a year and a half ago on Lanterman-Petrus Short Act, which is related to individuals who have severe mental illness, who are involuntarily committed to a facility to get help. And we found some pretty significant issues where someone may get that help, but then when they're released from that facility, they don't have that network to assist them in, getting mental health care, continued care. And there was some legislation making its way through the process, the legislative process, and it was pretty much unlikely to even make it to the governor's desk. And after our audit came out, that bill was essentially resurrected and got to the governor, got signed, and I think was going to really affect change and hopefully help a lot of people in California. So that's the way we measure the value that our office provides, is, are we making recommendations that the current administration, whomever it is, can implement, and it improves things for California. But certainly, can we make legislative recommendations where the legislature can, get a law on the books that's also going to improve things for people? That's ultimately our mission.
Right. You have other organizations too, like the LAO Legislative Analyst Office that does some very important work, particularly around the budget. You have a Little Hoover Commission that does some work. I mean, the state auditor is a group that's consistently relied on for that background information and how do we make government better. And as we were talking before we started this today, Republicans, conservatives are concerned about, is government doing what they're supposed to be doing? Liberals and progressives want to make sure the government's, whatever they're doing it effectively to address the problem. So this is kind of a bipartisan support of the work that you do. I want to make sure that we allow folks, if they've got any questions before we end here, they can ask them. Does anyone have any questions before we let the state auditor go, which she's been incredibly generous with her time? We greatly appreciate it.
I think, Jean, do you have a question? Hopefully.
Yes, it's frustrating to know that we have all of these companies in Silicon Valley that teach the world how to process information. Salesforce.com knows more about where I bought a book or ate lunch. Are we wasting a resource?
We hear that from members of the legislature. How can California struggle so much with its IT projects and have such antiquated systems when we have, globally, some of the most talented people working in Silicon Valley? And I think, and we've audited IT procurement in California. We've looked at governance, and some of the issues that we've identified related to that are, I think the simplest term to use is scope creep, where an agency is trying to determine, like, let's use EDD, for example, we want to upgrade our system. And then they start with a relatively modest scope. And then, with all due respect to the vendors, some of the vendors come in and say, it would be really cool if you have this. And why don't we add this? And then the project gets more and more complex. It gets bigger and bigger, and it just gets unmanageable. So what we have suggested to our Department of Technology, which we think needs to do a better job of working with agencies, is make sure when you're working with these departments that you keep the scope. Now, what is your critical mission? What are you hoping to be able to, or what's your mission, EDD? Your mission is to pay benefits. Okay, what are the things we need to do to be able to pay benefits on time, correctly, and to prevent fraud? And let's just focus on that. Let's not think about all these other issues. I think the other thing, though, when we've looked at IT, I mean, in the private sector, if they have an IT system that they invest a lot of money in, and all of a sudden it's not functioning well, it hits the cutting room floor and nobody ever hears about it. Government, it's transparent. I mean, it's out there for all the world to see, and it should be that way. But I think our state needs to do a better job of managing IT projects. One of the problems that the state struggles with is some of the IT professionals that come work for the state of California develop a skill set, and then they become very marketable, and they go into the private sector and make a heck of a lot more money than they do working for the state. So that's part of the problem too.
Yeah, we have, Elaine, how long have you been on the job as state auditor?
You're aging me, Mark. I was first appointed in August of 2000, so I'm in year 21.
Well, I mean, as a taxpayer and as a citizen of California, I want to thank you for the work that you do. And by the way, I wanted to let you know that someone here in the chat room has nominated you, recommended you for sainthood. So
It's not, I've been blessed. I mean, people have talked, why don't you go to the private sector? It's like, I really believe in public service. I've enjoyed this job. I've done it for a long time. It's been challenging. And one of the things that's really fun about this job is the people that I get to work with, because we hire really talented young people and see them develop and grow. But also you get to look at a variety of different issues. You're not, we're looking at IT, we're looking at EDD, we're looking at education issues and transportation issues like CARB and that sort of thing. And that really, kept me going as far as, because I started as an entry-level auditor here back in '83 and worked my way up and ultimately became state auditor in 2000, and just feel really blessed to have had these opportunities.
Well, thank you for that. And before we leave, is there anybody else that has any questions?
Thank you, everyone, for your time. I really appreciate you taking your lunch hour to hear me talk.
Well, thank you very much for being here, Elaine Howle, California State Auditor. Really appreciate your time and answering our questions. And
Thanks
thank you, everyone. And
thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Take care.